Sam, I said, this whole fatherhood thing, you would understand it better than I have because you're the customer, right? You're the person. And said, so what advice would you give my friend about fatherhood? And he said, when you're younger, you just want your parents around and to pay attention to you.
Yeah.
Not coddle you, but just to be there. And he said, but once you get into kind of middle school, you're really around your peers, and your parents, their job then is to be a good role model. Mm-hmm. And he said, and this is what chilled me, he said, so to be a good father, all you can do is work on yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so hard.
Yeah.
And I stopped and I went, oh my gosh, have I worked on myself enough? but it was just like this from a 19-year-old. It's like, as a father, I need to love my child and work on myself.
Yeah.
And that's the way the child will be healthy. The reason that when we have a problem, it's generally the parent, over-parenting or wanting to intervene for the child.
Yeah.
And they're prohibited by contract from doing that. They sign a contract that says, I won't do that, and then they'll do it anyway.
Right.
And so
it's very hard for parents to let go of
it
that
is hard.
if that's their habit.
It is hard.
And there is a narcissism in that too, because then the parent gets to take credit for the child's success.
Right.
And to trumpet that. And,
yes.
And that's that whole Oedipal mother nightmare that Freud outlined so brilliantly so long ago. It's like, and it's hard if you're a caregiver, again, to give the devil his due.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably harder for women because they have to give their all to their infants in a self-sacrificing manner.
Yes.
Because infants require full, dedicated, this isn't about me care. The problem is, so the psychoanalyst said, the good mother necessarily fails. And what they meant by that was the woman is faced with this terrible necessity of dispensing with that full-fledged maternal care incrementally and facilitating the child's movement forward. And I think it's very useful for a woman to have her masculine side developed for that, or to have, more likely, to have a male partner around who's more oriented towards encouragement than let's say, that intense maternal care. But it's definitely the case that you want to foster in your children and in the people you're mentoring that ability to do things on their own. There's a rule of thumb for care of elderly people. It's a very good one. Never do anything for the person you're caring for they can do themselves. Right? And that's
because you want them to keep doing everything they can.
Yeah, you don't want, and you want them to retain their dignity, and you don't want to steal from them what responsibility they have left, and you want to encourage their autonomy, if for no other reason, then you're not going to be overburdened with having to do everything, right?
Right.
So, so let's, two questions here. One is, how do you develop that community ethos that orients the entire community to regulate the behavior of the members in a positive manner? How do you bring that about?
You're continuing to play game after game after game with different kinds of motivational systems. So sometimes it's the hero's journey and more of a Maslow's hierarchy kind of feeling or a Jungian feeling. Sometimes it's being rewarded with extrinsic rewards. Sometimes those are squad-based. Sometimes they're individual. Sometimes they're the whole studio. Sometimes they're all. Right. So you're just playing game after game after game.
So it's an aggregation of playable games.
It's a lot of experiments going on within a rubric that is rewarding this feedback and collapses. And then part of it is it's hard because the studio will completely collapse. And as an adult, you want to step in and fix it, right? Yeah. And so we say, okay, step back.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath, leave it alone.
Okay, collapse in what way? What did you see happen?
There's two cliques, and they're arguing about something, and the civility's broken down, and
social fragmentation,
or excellence. The people have kind of gotten blasé about excellence. Or I saw something interesting in our high school, in our launch pad. They had built such a complex, cool society that and you know this from having run companies. If you're not careful, you build up so many rules that your company becomes a bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So they were getting to that stage. It was a beautiful society. And they looked at it and they said, we're going to do away with all but 3 rules. And if we want to put a rule back, the first thing we're going to do is ask the person the rule is being instituted for, why do you not want to be here? Because right? So we're not going to put a rule for the edge case. We're going to deal with the individual and try to listen to them. And maybe they need to leave for a while, or maybe we need to help them, And so you just see these simple and complex set of experiments, and they're learning by doing and watching. And so when you either get, a tyrannical situation or a Lord of the Flies going on, you step back once, and then it always gets worse. You step back again.
Yeah.
And here's the magic that happens. At that point, 3 or 4 of the sheepdogs, we call them because they're the ones that get the wolves, will come to you and say, we don't want to live like this anymore. And then you say Socratically, well, do you think you would like to try a pure democracy or a democratic republic? They might not even know at age 8 what that is, but they have the internet. They can go figure it out. And they'll come back and have a town council meeting and vote on a new structure. We had one time, we were actually
right. So now they have a problem with governance, and now they have the motivation to find out what good governance means.
So we got actually ejected as the guide. I got ejected from the studio because they didn't want me in there anymore. So for a week, there'll be a week go by and no adult goes in our middle school. It runs itself. Wow. So I was actually kind of asked to leave, so I left. And I thought, well, we'll see what they do with it.
Yeah.
The studio broke down. I didn't really know what was going on inside. I came back after about 10 days. I was invited back because they couldn't create as good a learning challenges. The games they were creating weren't as good, so they wanted some more games. When I came back in, they had taken masking tape and they had divided the studio into like 8 city states because they've been reading about city states. Each city state had a different governance system, and people were voting with their feet where to reside.
Oh, yeah.
That kept going for about 6 months. It turned out to be an incredibly powerful way to organize the studio. And then at some point that broke down.
So it's a competition between the invitations.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this on the religious front, talking to, I probably have talked about this most particularly with some of the more fundamentalist Muslims that I've talked to, that the notion of holy war, jihad, William James said 150 years ago that we needed a moral equivalent to war, right? Something as difficult and challenging, but oriented towards the uppermost good, let's say. And I was thinking about the religious competition as a competition between invitations. And so the idea would be, and this is sort of like the idea that as an adult, you're a role model for your teenagers. Like, all right, so you've got this set of principles on the Islamic side, let's say. Are you such a shining example of those principles in practice that people look at you and think, man, I'd like to abide by that code?
Yeah.
And that seems right to me, is that a competition of invitations, first of all, it has the advantage of competition. It's like, well, there's a bunch, and that's experimentation, essentially.
Right.
And it can be intense competition, but if it's invitational, then people get to use freedom of conscience and freedom of association to choose. And that seems to give us the best of both worlds. So how did you manage to motivate yourself to stay the hell out of it when things were...
Well, it's where I was lucky that having been in Harvard Business School and been among the best Socratic teachers in the world, having practiced Socratic teaching, and we had all these hotshot entrepreneurs that came to teach with us at the MBA level, but you had to help and work with them and yourself to keep your ego out of it. So, if you're teaching a case and all of our teachers were very exceptionally successful entrepreneurs. You want to step in and give the answer, right?
Yeah,
but that was
faster.
But that was forbidden. You would get ejected from the teaching corps for doing that. And so we all agreed to live by a contract, and we had micro routines we would execute. Just like in the studio, there's all these micro routines layered upon each other.
Yeah.
And so I was just equipped. I want to give an answer as much as anybody else in the world, and I do sometimes. I shouldn't.
Yeah.
But I'm equipped to say it's so much more powerful to say, would you do A or B next?
Well, for the men that are listening, this is a useful thing to know about your wives. It's true in interpersonal communication in general, but, your wife is going to sit down with you and lay out her complaints about whatever happens to be happening. And you might think that you know what to do about that, and you might think that what she wants is for you to do something about it and to provide an answer. Now, that also might be your impatience because you want to just cut to the chase and solve the damn problem. And so it's not all moral virtue on your side that you actually know what to do. But what you have to understand is that when someone's first walking through a problem set, part of what they're trying to do is to figure out what the problem is. And so unless you let them lay out the problem landscape without interference, you don't even know that the problem you're solving is the correct problem. And that you definitely see this in the psychotherapeutic relationship all the time, is that man, once you've got the problem properly identified, you're 90% of the way to solving it. But that wandering around to begin with,
Yeah.
and the Socratic method's very useful for that. It also helps people build, well, to investigate their doubts thoroughly, but
Right.
also to build the analytic skills necessary to assess a problem properly and to start to strategize.
I remember Laura was in a discussion with one of our top acting MBA teachers one time. We were in a case discussion, and he's a wonderful guy named Stephen Tomlinson, and he stopped her in mid-sentence, and he said, ask yourself at this moment, would you rather be right or would you ever rather be curious?
Right, right.
And it changed her life. I mean, she's always been a curious person.
Yeah.
She was like, oh, I was trying to be right at this moment.
Yeah.
And so it's those kind of revelations.
Yeah, that's
like, you know,
well, that's
curious.
that's the pharaonic temptation, as in Pharaoh,
Yeah.
is to be right. Now, a good way around that, I think, metacognitively, is to think, okay, are there more things you know or more things that you don't know?
Mm-hmm.
Now, anyone with any sense knows that no matter how thick the book they've read, you know, in total is, the book of things they haven't read or encountered is way thicker.
Yeah.
And so then the next question is, well, would you rather be friends with what you know or friends with what you don't know? And that's an infinite landscape. And so if you can learn to be the friend of what you don't know, then, and you're really afraid about that. It's like, no, I